Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, of course, for those of you that did not end up getting to watch the fight yesterday, or maybe some of you overall that have not heard the news, there was a very decent boxing fight yesterday, of course, between that of two very decent 154-pound contenders. Of course, one being the former champion, who was the first and only man so far to beat that of Mr. Jermell Charlo, of course, Mr. Tony Harrison from that of Detroit, Michigan. And then, of course, overall, the undefeated top prospect or the undefeated top contender, Mr. Tszyu, who, of course, is the son of former decently great champion from Australia, Mr. Tszyu, who fought, I believe, throughout the 1990s and a little bit of the early 2000s, possibly even a little bit earlier, but I can't really remember. But anyways, when it came down to it, after the fight was over, Tszyu, like I had predicted, did end up winning the fight. I believe that he ended up winning by stoppage within about 9 rounds, and he KO'd that of Tony Harrison. And I can't really remember if I completely predicted him to win by unanimous decision or KO. I think that I said that it was either going to happen by later stoppage or that a unanimous decision, because I was not 100% sure which version of Tony Harrison was going to show up. Well, in my opinion, Tony Harrison, even though in my opinion he was just always a guy that never really could answer the bell or really overall live up to the expectations always put on his shoulders. In my opinion, like I said, and this is one of the reasons why I also picked Tszyu to win the fight, I don't think that Tony Harrison has really ever looked like the same fighter ever since he lost to Jermell Charlo in the rematch. Just my personal opinion. And some people may think that that's excuses. I don't know if the best version of Tony Harrison would have ever beat someone like a Tszyu in the first place, and maybe some of you personally disagree with me. But like I said, ever since that Jermell Charlo loss in that rematch, he's even looked more hittable and more defensively responsible than what he even did in his prior matches. Just my personal opinion. And if you don't believe me, you could take a look at the Jose Padilla fight. I believe that was one of the fights to where he had a draw in over a journeyman fighter that was like 17-3. And then, of course, he fought Sergio Garcia, a fight that I believe he ended up dominating, but still a fight all in all that he probably could have been more impressive in, or that he could have not got hit as much in. Anyways, not to digress too much here, Jermell Charlo gave his opinions about the fight and overall what he thinks about Tszyu and what he thinks about that potential matchup next. DontaesBoxingNation is also going to commentate on it. He had certain points that I also thought were very interesting, and I'm also going to go into further and deeper into who I believe is going to win the fight and why, and what advantages and disadvantages both fighters are going to have. So let's get into it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The competitor that I had in front of me, he's the man that beat the man, which means I'll just beat the man who beat the man. What does that make me?
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So Tszyu, he stops Tony Harrison in the 9th round in impressive fashion, and now he will be fighting against the undisputed champion, Jermell Charlo, next. For those of you guys who didn't know, they were originally scheduled to fight until Jermell Charlo had an injury. So Tszyu, he decided to take a stay busy fight against top 5 at the time, one of the best junior middleweights in the division, which is Tony Harrison. So immediately after he stopped him, Jermell Charlo, he reacted to the Tszyu win, and this is what he had to say.
Oh, this is exactly what we've seen. Come forward, not as fast and bigger pace. Strong, of course, throw hard punches. Don't we all? But I'm a different animal in there. Like, I'm a different fighter than Tony. You can't compare me and try to compare Tony's skills of boxing. He did move.
Well, you know what, to really be honest with you, Mr. Jermell, and I like Jermell. I think that Jermell, that he's a very decent guy. I think that both Charlo brothers are very decent people, at least from what it appears to me. And they're both very decent champions. But to say all in all that you can't really compare Tony Harrison's skill set, well, to be quite real with you, Jermell Charlo, Tony Harrison, not only is he the only guy to defeat you at that point in time in his career, but Tony Harrison, in the rematch, had he not blown it like usual, he probably could have ended up winning that fight because, in my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinions, Tony Harrison probably should have been up on the scorecards in that rematch. But, of course, like usual, he put way too much pressure on his shoulders and the anxiety issues. It was just way too much for him. So, of course, like regular, he ended up blowing up basically another lead. So it just is what it is. Now, what I will say is this. You can't just basically base it off that. if you're going on the Tim Tszyu fight, because once again, styles make fights. And just because Tony Harrison gives Jermell Charlo a very tough fight and Tim Tszyu beat him in much better fashion, that doesn't always mean something. And if you're just asking me personally, who do I believe is going to win the fight, I personally think that Jermell Charlo would beat that of Tim Tszyu. Like I said, I think that Tim Tszyu, I give him about a 30% chance. And Dante's Boxing Nation, he can tell you all the shit about, oh, it's a 50-50 fight, and when Jermell Charlo wins the fight, he's going to have to be even higher on the pound-for-pound list. And once again, this is just my view, and certain people over, once again, they'll probably think that I'm hating or whatever it is, but at the end of the day, once again, Jermell Charlo, he's, in my opinion, at least if you're a logical thinker, I think it's very clear that he's not a top 5 pound-for-pound fighter. You can maybe debate him as top 10, and even then, some would even debate that that's a little bit of a stretch. I think that Jermell Charlo was a top 10 to top 15 pound-for-pound fighter. Once again, when you talk about certain fighters like Tyson Fury, Canelo Alvarez, Errol Spence Jr., Terrence Bud Crawford, and Alexander Usyk, in my opinion, Jermell Charlo, he's not over any of those fighters. Because those guys, they have the resume, they have the dominance when it comes down to it, and most of those fighters are also undefeated that I just mentioned. In terms of Canelo, he's a 4-weight division champion, unified a completely different division when it came down to it, and on top of that, he has repeated A-grade names on his resume. So really, Jermell Charlo, the fighters that he has to be in the same conversation with is not really those 5 guys. He has to be in the same conversation with Dimitri Bivol, Artur Beterbiev, Josh Taylor, Naoya Inoue, Shakur Stevenson, and Devin Haney. And if we're really going to be real here, I'm not really 100% sure if he beats any of those guys on the pound-for-pound list. And that's why last time he was not on my top 10 pound-for-pound list. If you have him there, I don't have a problem with it. But once again, I need to see some sort of consistency. Why do you have him there? Because most people will say, oh, well, Jermell Charlo, he beat, certain guys in one of the deepest divisions in boxing. Once again, this is not me hating on Jermell Charlo in any way or that weight division. But who really is there to compete with Jermell Charlo? Who really? There was one fighter, in my opinion, in Brian Castano that was a very, very big test. Every other fighter there is pretty much a punching bag. It is what it is. Sebastian Fundora, he's a guy that has some sort of potential. He has that same Antonio Margarito, David Benavidez style to where I'm going to use my height, my reach, and my length and my size to really try and bully you. But as soon as they face a real fighter that can compete with their power and their size, more than likely they're not going to be able to beat them. It just is what it is. And Tim Tszyu, in my opinion, I think that all around skill-wise, he's probably better than what a Sebastian Fundora is. He can box a little bit, but in my opinion, he's just a little bit too flawed to beat someone like that of a Jermell Charlo. And if I had to guess, Tim Tszyu, more than likely, he's going to be another fighter to where if he cannot pressure Jermell Charlo throughout the whole entire night, he's not going to be able to really do much with Jermell Charlo. I think that Tim Tszyu, to be quite honest with you, I think that the majority of the time, for him to be quite successful, I think that he has to pretty much out-pressure you and believe that eventually he can stop you or pretty much overall bully you the whole entire night. And Jermell Charlo, in my opinion, he's not going to allow that. Jermell Charlo knows how to use his power. Sometimes, yes, he is a bit too stiff, and sometimes his feet at times can be a bit more clunky when it comes down to it. But at the end of the day, Jermell Charlo is an A-grade skilled boxer. He's not A+. In my opinion, he's not even A. He's probably around an A-. But he does enough to get the job done. And I just don't know if Tim Tszyu, if he has enough of the skill set or enough power really to bully that of a Jermell Charlo, because that's the only way, in my opinion, that he can really win.
That's than what he normally does, but
obviously because the ring was smaller.
Correct, the ring was smaller, but that still doesn't, he didn't dog it out. He didn't bring that dog in. If he wanted to fight me, he would have to bring more dog in him. But Tim is next, and that's what we had before the injury. So it's not like I'm not prepared already.
Absolutely.
So.
Man.
All right, so according to Jermell Charlo, he didn't see anything new. This is the same Tim Tszyu that he was preparing for before the injury. I like the point he made when he was talking about Tim Tszyu's power. He says, yeah, of course he's got power, but don't we all? Listen, what it basically comes down to is power is obviously great to have. A lot of times it can bail you out of trouble. Like Deontay Wilder, for example. Like Manny Pacquiao, for example. Fighters that have a lot of flaws, you could usually bail yourself out of trouble when you're getting outboxed, when you're down on the score.
Right, but you can't compare Manny Pacquiao and Deontay Wilder. Dante, a lot of the times, and not to digress too much here, he brings up Manny Pacquiao in the same fashion as what a Deontay Wilder or some of these other fighters that were just completely overrated or overhyped when it came down to it. Basically, he just called Manny Pacquiao a one-dimensional fighter, and Pacquiao was never a one-dimensional fighter. Now, you can say that he had flaws. You can say that he wasn't as a defensive master as what a Floyd Mayweather Jr. was. You can say that sometimes his footwork, especially when throwing certain punches, that, sometimes it's a little bit awkward. You can say all in all that, sometimes Pacquiao, he's had his problems in the past, especially with certain boxers or counter punches. You can claim that, but let's just not sit here and act like Manny Pacquiao is just this one-dimensional fighter that once his power didn't work overall, or once he wasn't able to bully you, he wasn't able to outbox you, or that he wasn't able to do anything. You're talking about a guy that was able to beat all-time great after all-time great. You're talking about a guy that beat Eric Morales, Marco Antonio Barrera. He beat Miguel Cotto. He beat Keith Thurman. He beat Timothy Bradley. He beat Juan Manuel Marquez. He beat all those guys. All right? Shane Mosley, even though he was a little bit older when it came down to it, and a multitude of other fighters. Like, come on, let's not compare Manny Pacquiao to someone who was a complete plan A and one-dimensional fighter, and that of Deontay Wilder.
Cards with that eraser, right? But power will only get you.
And other fighters, if we're really going to compare with that, those are other fighters like that of an Antonio Margarito, or a Sebastian Fundora, or, a George Foreman, or a Jarrett Hurd. Those are fighters that you have to compare with that type of style. Not Manny Pacquiao. Not someone that, can box around guys using his great feet movement, and at times his very good footwork. And all in all, once again, he's not the best I've ever seen defensively, but he's not the worst either. Actually, he has very good defense at times. He keeps his hands up. He always moves his head off center. Manny Pacquiao is not a guy that, if you know anything about boxing, that you compare to the likes of a Deontay Wilder and a George Foreman, because Pacquiao's skill set was always way more than those guys. Always.
So far, if you don't have the skill to match it, or maybe I should say if your skill doesn't surpass it, skill, technique, and defense, those are the most important attributes to have in the sport of boxing. This is the reason why Ryan Garcia...
Well, the most important thing to have in boxing is just a great all-around game and boxing IQ. And I think that Tszyu, that he's a very decent boxer. He seems overall to have even impressed me a little bit more than what I thought he was once originally going to. But that fight against Jermell Charlo is going to be a completely different animal. And the question will be, if Tszyu feels that power early, and if he ends up backing up, how is that going to fare? Because Tszyu just doesn't come across to me as a style that is going to be able to box very well against Jermell Charlo on the back foot. He looked a little bit better on the back foot yesterday, or over in the middle of the ring, than what I thought he was going to. And I'm not saying that pressuring Jermell Charlo that can't work, because we've seen a lot of success with that with Tony Harrison, and also that of Brian Castano. But at the end of the day, I just don't know if Tszyu, I don't know if he's going to be the same threat. I don't think that he has the experience that those guys did when it came down to it. I don't think that he has the skill set of a Brian Castano. I could be wrong, but we'll see what ends up happening.
Garcia has said on multiple occasions that he believes Devin Haney is the most dangerous fighter out of the bunch when it came to Teofimo Lopez, Gervonta Tank Davis, and Devin. It's the guy with the least amount of power that they feel is the most dangerous. Not the man with all the power, which is Gervonta. Speaking of power, since I have this clip playing right now, Castaño was someone else who had a lot of power. And we've seen how that turned out. Jermell, he also talked about Tszyu's speed, saying that he was slow.
It's very interesting the point that Dante just brought up, because whenever it comes to Canelo Alvarez facing very decent defensive fighters, or certain fighters that once upon a time were looked at as slick, like Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant, and then you can debate all you want to that Jermell Charlo and Andrade are better than those guys. In my opinion, Jermell Charlo, when you talk about peak Billy Joe Saunders and peak Caleb Plant, Jermell Charlo probably loses to both of them. Just my opinion. Just is what it is. All you have to do is take a look at the fight against Matt Korobov and a couple of other fights in Jermell Charlo's career. He's a guy that sometimes can be a little bit too stiff. Sometimes, all in all, his feet are a bit clunky when it comes down to it. And on top of that, he's not a guy that likes to throw in excess. It just is what it is. All right, so that's just my opinion. Now, Demetrius Boobo Andrade, you can debate that Andrade, overall, that he's maybe slightly ahead of them. I would say that he's above Billy Joe Saunders, but Caleb Plant, in my opinion, around the same level. Maybe you can debate that there are certain things that Demetrius Andrade does better. But once again, isn't that interesting depending on the fighter? Oh, he's fighting a guy that can't compete with him in terms of power, But then overall, when it comes to other fighters, oh, well, it really only matters about the defense. Very, very interesting. But I understand what Dante is getting at when it comes down to it. Jermell Charlo, in my opinion, he probably does have the all-around better defense than Tszyu. But we'll see what happens because both of them are vulnerable to a jab. Both of them are also vulnerable to a right cross, it appears. Jermell Charlo was also vulnerable to a left to the body and a left up to the head. Tszyu, he does have a very good left hook, and he also does have a very good right. But he's going to have to try to use his feet, which in my opinion, they are awkward. At times when it comes down, he is going to have to try to use his feet to move in and out to try and get out of range. And he's going to have to try to press Jermell Charlo the whole entire time. Do I think he's going to be able to do that? I think he's going to win certain rounds, but I don't think he's going to win the fight.
Now, that was something that I didn't pay attention to, but of course, Jermell Charlo, he could see things through a different type of lens with his experience. There's no doubt about it. You definitely cannot compare Tony Harrison to a Jermell Charlo. Jermell, he can do it all. Tony Harrison was extremely uncomfortable on the inside with Tszyu. And I think that when it comes to Charlo, he's going to be extremely comfortable. I think there's going to be times in the fight where Jermell is going to be trying to walk down Tszyu. Tszyu, he has a lot of technique, and he's a very accurate puncher.
I agree. Like I said, there's going to be a moment where Jermell Charlo, he's going to really try to rip a good shot to his head or rip a good shot to his body. He's going to really try to show him his full-on power, and Jermell's then going to say, what's up? You coming at me, you going after me, or you going to back up? What are you going to do in order to keep me off of you? That's what Jermell Charlo overall is pretty much going to say, and that's going to be a really big revelator of overall who Tszyu is as a fighter and what he can do.
And he's very aggressive. And a lot of times, fighters that are aggressive, they don't like fighting on their back foot, meaning when they...
I agree, because Tszyu, in my opinion, he does not really appear to have that style of being able to completely fight on the back foot the whole entire time. Once again, I think for him to mainly be successful, he has to mainly pressure.
Have an opponent that's actually forcing them backwards. Tony Harrison tried to mainly rely on his jab. When it comes to Jermell, we're going to see every punch in the book being thrown. So this is going to be a hell of a fight. And the fact that now Tszyu just knocked out Tony Harrison, which is a man who has a win over Jermell Charlo, that just makes the Charlo-Tszyu fight that much bigger. This year, boxing, guys, will be the biggest year of boxing in I don't know how long. We have so many big fights this year. This Charlo fight versus Tszyu, it's bigger than the Castaño rematch. So we have all of these big fights.
Well, in my opinion, it might be around the same, but maybe one could debate that it's bigger because of the hype behind Tszyu, him being, of course, a very decent boxer, and him, of course, being the son of a former legend, especially that in Australia, and, of course, the fact that he just beat the former opponent that beat Jermell Charlo. There's going to be a certain amount of hype behind this fight, so who knows? Dante may be correct with that. Either way, it'll be exciting to watch for however long it lasts.
This year. And Team USA is involved in almost all of them. You got Devin Haney versus Lomachenko, USA versus Ukraine. You got Stephen Fulton versus Inoue, USA versus Japan. You got Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia, USA versus Mexico. And now we're going to have...
Well, really USA versus USA, but I know what you mean.
USA versus Australia. Jermell Charlo versus Tszyu. I'm looking forward to it. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one. All right, now check this out.
Anyways, that's really about it. I just thought that I would review that because I thought it was very particularly interesting. But anyways, that's pretty much is about it for the video. We'll see what Mr. Tszyu will have in store for Mr. Jermell Charlo. I don't believe personally, in my opinion, that he would beat him. And if I were to just make a very, very super early prediction, I more than likely would probably predict that a Jermell Charlo to probably stop in about 9 to 10 rounds. Just my personal opinion. But we'll see overall what happens. Anyways, that's really about it for today. Thanks so much for watching. I'll talk to you all later.